Hello, 8th grade artists. So once again, I've got my Warheads candy wrapper example here. I've got my reference image in front of me on the computer. And what this video is going to do is just show you how to do some of the sort of cloudy area around the wording, and also especially the letters that are in the Warheads and the face that is on this little dude here. So there are a couple different steps going here. So I'm going to start on his face. So I'm going to zoom in so that we can see that a little bit more clearly. And what I'm going to do is primarily go to the top of his face because that's where most of the color is. And I'm going to go ahead and start with a red. And each peak of that sort of cloudy area where the cloud / hair, whatever it is, overlaps his face, I'm just going to do a sort of value scale going down so that the darkest part is in the center of that peak. And then as I move down toward his eyebrow, I'm going to get lighter and lighter with my value by pressing down less. Because remember, on his face and on his hair, there's not a lot of color, so there's not a lot of shading to be done. So we want to make sure that when we are using our darker colors, we're using them very lightly and very specifically. So just kind of working my way across the top part here. And then this part of it is even darker and goes down a little further with the darker color. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with this first value scale even though right now I'm not at my darkest value yet. I can still go ahead and start setting up for where that darker value is going to be. So still trying to keep all those transitions smooth, from one section to the next, and from one value to the next, and one color to the next. Lots of transitions in this type of shading, but we do want to make sure that we continue to practice making them as smooth as we can. So just darkening this part, because like I said, this part of his forehead does have a little bit more red on it than the left side of his forehead. And I am still building up that color, building up that value in layers, not just jumping in by pressing down super hard or anything. It takes some patience and it takes some practice, but it is well worth it. Once again, make sure that you are constantly looking at your reference image, because we do want to, again, make sure that we are making it as accurate to the original image as possible. And the only way to do that is by looking at our reference image a lot. So I'm just going to do kind of a second layer with this red, but only in the places where it needs to be. And still make sure that my transitions are nice and smooth as I go back toward the white of the paper in the areas where it needs to be lighter. So once again, keeping those pencil lines really close together, letting them overlap a lot so that I don't get lines where I don't want them. And as I was mentioning on the background, this is a lot easier to do on smaller spaces. So make sure that you take advantage of that and really work on making those spaces as close to perfect as you can. So now I'm going to turn my page because there is a spot of red above this eye, kind of going up. But it's not as dark as the forehead is. So I'm not going to press down as hard. Now there is a spot on this cheek and on both ears, and then there's a wee little spot over here, but not very much. So I'm going to start with the area that has more of the red than the other areas. Still making sure that I fade into the white of the paper as smoothly as I can. And there are some areas, like on this cheek actually, where sometimes the shading is more done just in a shape. And you can definitely treat it more like that. I've chosen to treat this one a little more like shading, just so that it matches the rest of his face a little bit, and because this particular part has both. But if you want to do more of the shape type of shading, if your candy enlargement has the shape type of shading, then you can. Like on the cloudy sort of hair area, there's a lot of that kind of shading, so I will be showing you that. And basically all you would be doing for that is drawing the shape of the shadow and coloring it in, all with one colored pencil. Not pressing down very hard, because the value of the entire shape there would be what creates the shading. So like on this type of shading, the gradual transitions from dark to light create the shading. But on the shape type of shading, the entire shape is one value, and that one value is very important in capturing the shading. So now there is a spot sort of around this part of his lip that has some shading on it. So I'm just going to turn my page again, because remember, I like to start with the tip of my pencil along the edge that I'm working on, just because for me that helps keep better control and helps my project to turn out a little bit neater. This is very subtle. It's not super obvious or super dark. So I'm just going to make it really light here. Because essentially what I'm doing right now is sort of like an under shading or an underpainting. I know we're not painting, but it would be called underpainting. And all it does is sort of create darker values where the shadows are going to eventually end up, but we are going to be going directly over all of these spaces again with a color that makes it a little bit more accurate to the color we need. So the shadows that we're working on right now definitely do stand out and create the shadows of the shading, but even more importantly, they help us create the correct value that we're going to be needing there. So once again, this cheek has just a wee little bit of pink, really, more than red. So I'm not going to press down hard at all. And then there's not really any red on the nose. So that might be sort of my first layer on his little face there. So then I've got sort of this pinky peach, I've got a regular peach, and I've got a white, which I would then be using on subsequent layers in a very similar fashion. starting again at the top with this sort of pinky peach directly on top of the red. Same concept, pressing down hardest at the top, pressing down less and less as I move down the face, just like in the reference image. But because this is my first sort of lighter color, I am going to extend that value scale down a little bit further on his face, because when I look at my reference image, that's what it looks like. It looks like the lighter dark value, so to speak, extends a little further down than the red dark value. So now I'm just bringing this color down a little bit more. And it looks like it gets kind of white around his eye. So I'm going to have it kind of fade out right around here. But then under his eyebrow, it's a little darker. Turn my page and basically do the same thing until I feel like I've gotten all of that sort of darkest part, the correct color and the correct value, and make sure I've got my transitions from darker to lighter in the correct spots with just these two colors so far. Remember to shade in sort of the same direction and then go back over all in a different direction to kind of fill in those white spots. Remember, you can also use the circular technique, because that will, once again, help you fill in the white spots without making extra pencil marks. And I'm going to go ahead and add some of this color to this spot. It does still get back to white up at the top where the eyebrow is, though. So it still is a pretty quick transition here from dark to light. And right now I've not used any white, but I would eventually use some white on something like this because I am transitioning into white. Now on his sort of hair cloudy area up here, the white areas are just going to be white. I'm not going to color them white because that is the shape type of shading. And once again, I will show you that in a separate video. But essentially, the gray areas are just like crescent moons where the shading goes. And then the rest of the cloudy area is white. So once again, using multiple colors does take some extra steps. It does take some extra time, but it is well worth it in terms of how much more accurate it will make your shading and the colors that you are using. And once again, I'm going to extend this color down a bit further. Looking on this side, it goes all the way down to about here, but it's gradually getting lighter and lighter as I move down that space. It's not just all one value. So I am going to extend that value nice and smooth all the way down there. Pressing down less and less as I go.